welcome to La Cañada Congregational Church as we continue in thinking how stories shape us and how the parables of Jesus expand our imagination to how we might tell a better story within our world today. I hope that through our prayers and singing and sermon, you are able to sense that this story has been made for you, that you are invited to live into God's story. And so I invite you to pray with me as we prepare to begin our worship this morning. Maker of heaven and earth, you have formed each of us within the expanse of your creation. You knit us together as a church and community so that we might embody your presence to all. Keeper of all things, guide us so that we might see your beauty around us and so remain committed to love and justice in the name of Christ. Amen. So the history of rock and roll is really all about rebelling against the norms that prevail in our culture, where the youth and young people will say no against all the stuff their parents say should happen. It's really identity building against the norms as teens are beginning to sense that they are becoming individuals, moving out of their parents' thumb and rule and really setting their own pace. And I think that's why that a lot of the rock and roll songs of our teenage years become identifiers for the rest of our life. School of Rock is a film that is an instant classic, where the loser is the hero who breaks the rules and shapes the kids out of their restrictive environments of this private school education into this rebellious attitude that actually shapes them. And in our parable today, we're going to hear Jesus sort of advocate for this rock and roll rebellion, where the hero of the story Jesus will tell is not good, but This idea is that maybe a little bit of rebellion does us some good. So I invite you to read with me our text for this morning. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I'm dismissed as a manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much money do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal home. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with the true riches? And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for a servant will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Okay, so Jesus tells a story about a servant who's skimming off the top of his master's wealth, and eventually the boss notices and says, "Hey, I'm going to need an updated profit and loss statement to figure out what's going on here." And so the dude knows he's going to get caught. And so before he has to get his 2 weeks notice, he calls up all those who owe debt to the master and says, basically, if I lose the job security I have, I better make friends with other people who might hire me or at least give me a place to sleep. And so he begins to refinance their loans in their favor, canceling debt as quickly as he can before the master catches on. He presses his dishonesty to the limit. And the master, as he is firing him, we find at the end of the story, has this attitude of sort of winking understanding of saying, "Hey, you did what you had to do. Now get out of here." In School of Rock, we start where Dewey steals his friend's identity, lies to school administrators, abandons the school curriculum, and then manipulates a bunch of kids in order to win a rock and roll music contest. He's blindly selfish throughout most of the story, and yet from early on, we cheer for him as a hero. I mean, why would we do that? He spreads disrespect to respectable kids. And by the end of the movie, they don't even win. We see the story shifts and changes because what happens is Dewey learns to love music and not just the fame that it could promise. And he also learns that this love that he develops can be shared rather than hoarded. Jesus will teach after he tells this story how the children of this age, that's a vernacular for saying those who are uninterested in following God, who live for themselves and are only concerned about, whatever's happening in the stock market right now, that they're more clever, they're more shrewd than the children of light, those who follow God, who sense God's arrival in Jesus and who anticipate a coming redemption that is, a little further out there. Jesus is saying that we who seek to follow God, who seek to be righteous in this world, could learn a thing or two from those who are shrewd. And he's basically saying, don't be naive. The world is brimming with corruption. In fact, I think that we could maybe steal a page from Neil Gaiman's playbook and recognize that there are American gods now by the name of capitalism, white supremacy, social media, fear-mongering, partisanship. And that those are the gods that are worshipped. Maybe not in temples like we would think of back in Roman days, but they're nevertheless held up as these pillars of American culture. Some of those pillars are shameful, but nevertheless, they still have their influence. They still bear weight upon our culture. They shape the way people think. And I think that the problem would be if we as Christians say, well, I'm not on TikTok and I'm not on cable news, and so I'm not influenced by those gods of capitalism and social media and fear-mongering. we're fooling ourselves. Jesus is saying, wake up a little bit and see that the world around us is dishonest and corrupt. We have become encultured by these things that simply because we exist in America in the 21st century, that we are formed without knowing we are being formed, that we worship easy liturgies of, again, just about every radio newscast ending with what the Tao is doing, and our fears or hopes follow those roller coasters of emotions. It's hard to carve out a separate religious life, is what Jesus is teaching. And that the children of this age sense that there's something a little more pressing in doing whatever they can to get ahead today. And that if we are maybe willing to borrow some of that mentality, we might actually see the light of God happen in this time. Basically, this idea is that if we have become encultured within these misshapen and misplaced priorities, what would happen if we started a rebellion from within? What if instead of feeling like we have excluded ourselves, we're separate from all this stuff that happens in the world, what if we recognize that we need a little bit of an attitude of we're going to take what's there and corrupt it for something good? Jesus says, if you can't be faithful with dishonest wealth, with the money that, let's say, capitalism brings in and the privilege that whiteness in America gives us, then how can you be trusted with eternal riches? You see, our aim is different. Our direction and intent as Christians that follow Jesus is not the same as the children of this age. We are shaping ourselves toward love and justice and mercy and forgiveness. But what Jesus says is that we still have to wield the reality of our world. We still have to realize that it's the stuff of earth that we are playing with, even though our hope is in this more spiritual reality. And so, for example, there's a practice that happens now where credit companies will buy hospital debt, often pennies on the dollar, because hospitals don't have time to chase down those who owe them money. And so the credit companies will buy this debt, chase down themselves, and hopefully make a little bit money on the interest. That's the way that it works. And if you've ever gotten a call from a collection agency, it's probably because they've bought your debt from someone else. So what happens is that United Church of Christ churches act like these credit companies, finding debt from other hospitals, buying it, and then forgiving that debt. Rather than chasing people down to tell them, hey, you don't owe us 20 grand anymore, you owe us 10, but we need it now or we're going to ruin your credit. They call the people up and say, you owe this hospital money and we bought it and paid it off. You see, they're using the system against itself in order for the greater good of love and justice and mercy. There are people who will risk feeding homeless people when it's against the law. There's municipalities that make rules saying you're not allowed to feed homeless people in public places like parks where most homeless people will gather. There's people who will use their wealth to care for those in need. That people who will use their social media to denounce racism every time it comes up. Or who use their language to create authentic space for people to be welcomed and to confess their own frustrations and dangers. Now, I think that this approach and what Jesus is teaching in this story is that this rebellion requires some wisdom. That it can be one of these things that's dangerous when we have good intentions, but our aim is off and we get corrupted by this promise of power and wealth and we end up becoming the thing we hate. We've seen that happen. And so wisdom will tell us that we should not just rebel individually, which I think is sort of quintessentially American. You see, just like in School of Rock, Dewey makes this breakthrough. He ends up teaching the kids to write a song, that they begin to voice their grievances against their parents and the powerful school officials. And what ends up happening as he teaches them to voice their own frustrations, he ends up creating a band rather than the one-man show that he was used to. He's created this community of rebels. I think Jesus' story asks the question, what if the church was like that? It's like a rock and roll band with our eyes open to the corruption around us, the dishonesty around us, the ignorance around us, and then all of that also that exists within us? And then what if we were to aim to do better? What if we would abandon this calculation of bottom line finances that we often play with, not only in organizations, but within our own lives, of what good does it do me to help someone else in need when I also have needs? And what if instead of acting as if all the resources that we have at our disposal are scarce and so we have to hoard and keep them safe from, again, the whims of a stock market? And what if instead we saw the abundance of God's gifts? Less concerned about shareholders and more that we see the community beyond as our calling. Less concerned about what only is happening within the four walls of our homes and see what's happening in the wider neighborhood. You see, the gift that Jesus gives us is to say we can acknowledge all of the pain in this world, all of the corruption that exists, all of the ways that good ends up being shifted toward selfish gain. And then we imagine a world where, what if we were to use all that stuff, all the money and social media and all these things that have been wielded in corrupt ways, and instead invite people to use it differently? Instead, invite people to rebel from within and perhaps to even change the very future of what's happening. That we create this sense of friendships, even with those who are not quite like us, because we need, like every good band, someone who can do rhythm and lead guitar, who can sing, who can make costumes and set design, who can be the front man and the behind the scenes. We need all of that in order to create a movement that will shape the world around us. That's Jesus's invitation to us. We can't serve both God and wealth. We have to choose at some point. And in that choice, we will see how we might be able to still use wealth, still use the abundance of the world around us, but rebel against the way that that's often wielded. So my hope is that, maybe you find a rock and roll song that encourages you to rebel a little bit, to say no to all the corruption around you, and instead find a better way of living into the story that Jesus has invited us into. Amen.
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Oh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short, when I don't belong. Or you say I am yours, and I believe, oh I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. have every failure, God. You'll have every victory. Oh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short, when I don't belong.